This first poll asked, are you excited for the election to be over in a few days? 50% said yes. 50% said, sorry, I was screaming yes too loud to hear the end of the question.
Hey guys, welcome back to Celeb Top. Today we'll talk about whether we can trust polls in 2020, why polls are more reliable now. Let's head into it. Number 1, unreliable polls in 2016. It's probably a fair assumption that during the 2016 election, most dedicated news consumers thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. There were a lot of people, these polls said so. On the night before Election Day, according to their roundup of national and state polls, the New York Times projection gave her an 85% chance of winning. One of the world's most reputable pollsters, 538, said she had a 71% chance. That way, it didn't turn out. Election night came to many as a shock, and the media elite's hubris became the election story.
This loss hurts.
The hurt was written all over as they wiped away tears, and held hands, and comforted each other with hugs.
Number 2, polls weren't wrong. In the years that followed, pollsters had a rough time explaining why the 2016 polls were so wrong and why they should be trusted again and again. Their response to that charge was relatively uniform, and they were not incorrect. Chris Jackson, head of the public polling at ILPOS, said, I think what happened in 2016 was not really a failure of methodology or technique, but it was a failure of analysis and reporting. We, like many other people, sort of got hung up on the idea that Clinton winning by 3 percentage points in the national popular vote meant something, and took our eye off of the importance of those electoral college and how the electoral college could, and in fact, deviate from those results. That argument is supported by the numbers. The real clear polling average of election polls had Clinton 3.2 points and ahead nationally the day before the election. The final result with the margin of error was 2.1%. The lesson from 2016 then isn't that the polls were wrong, but that the way they were presented to the public lost important nuances about how they should be read. In the 2016 election season, for instance, the New York Times debuted its much derided needle, a swingometer type graphic that became one of its best read election pages. Jeremy Bowers, senior editor for the news app for the NYT, said the needle was a means of visualizing uncertainty, but a needle pointing to Clinton's 80% chance of victory seemed pretty certain to most. The same criticism was made of 538, whose model was slightly more cautious, but the uncertainty of the projection it was making nevertheless failed to translate to the public. I think because they're so smart, they present stuff in these probability formats, and I think that provides more confidence than perhaps people should have on what the results are going to be, Mr. Jackson said. Today they're at what? 77-22 against Trump? That's essentially 1 time out of 4. Trump wins in their models. 1 time out of 4 is not bad, you know? Like a lot of people will go to Vegas and bet on that on a heartbeat. And they think that's such a big difference from Biden's not going to win. Number 3, why polls are useful and trustworthy this time. So there are reasons to treat polls with more caution, perhaps for the public, but in the past 4 years, there have been some lessons learned as well. Pollsters and statisticians say they know why the polls, and made adjustments, did not give a fuller image than they could. In 2016, there were a number of oddities and unknowns that made accuracy more challenging. The question of whether the polls will be right this time has become something of an obsession for journalists as of late. G. Elliot Morris, a data journalist who runs The Economist election forecast, said, what went wrong last time and what did change are the biggest questions that reporters are asking pollsters right now. They start with the assumption that things have gone catastrophically wrong, and they want to know what pollsters have done to fix this disastrously miscalibrated industry, when in fact the polls get better. Nonetheless, Mr. Morris said that in 2016 there were a few variables that hamper projections. The first was that in the final weeks of the campaign, an unusually high number of voters were undecided, and most of them swung toward Trump. The second was that pollsters failed to weigh in their surveys through dedication and education, which meant that in polls, college-educated voters were overrepresented, giving Clinton an inaccurate lead. In the Midwest, where Trump racked up some of his most surprising victories, this was particularly true. The first of these 2 weaknesses has been tackled largely on its own. The number of undecided voters is much lower than in 2016, which means less confusion. The second, educational weighting, is now taken into account in the models of most pollsters, meaning in theory that the outcome should be more precise. The third issue in 2016, which any predictive model does not and cannot address perfectly, is who will turn out to vote. It's sort of a classic error in polling, and it's an intractable error, said Mr. Morris. Pre-election polls are attempting to forecast essentially the demographics of who's going to turn on election day, and they do that typically by asking people are going to vote or not. This is a source of error because people aren't entirely truthful about whether or not they're going to vote, he added. According to Mr. Jackson, another factor was at play, a lack of reliable state polling. So while the national picture was largely accurate, minor differences were missed in states that helped tip Trump's electoral college in favor. But should we trust the polls again with those modifications and improvements taken into consideration? Well, that isn't really the problem. According to Mr. Morris, we should rather just adjust the way we think about polls altogether. They really are a great tool for measuring the sentiment of the public. It just so happens that in close elections like 2016, when small errors can make the entire forecast change, they can't perfectly predict an outcome, he said. In an impassioned defense of his model written days ahead of Trump's inauguration in January 2017, Nate Silver pointed the finger back at traditional reporters and editors who, he argued, had built a revisionist history about how they covered Trump and why he won. The real shortfall of 2016 was not the polls, he argued, but a pervasive groupthink among media elites, and a healthy obsession with the insider's view of politics, a lack of analytical rigor, a failure to appreciate appreciate uncertainty, a sluggishness to self-correct when new evidence contradicts pre-existing beliefs, and a narrow viewpoint that lacks perspective from the longer arc of American history. Mr. Jackson had a similar message to anyone still angry at pollsters. Be a little bit more careful and just understand the polls are not a crystal ball, he said. People should always keep in mind, as polls are by definition looking backwards. These are people that we interviewed yesterday or 2 days ago or a week ago, and people are actually usually kind of bad about predicting their own behavior. So trying to take that and project it forward into the future is always risky. What do you think about the polls? You think we can trust them? Let us know in the comment section. This brings us to the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any of our videos in the future. Also watch the 2 videos that are on your screen because I'm sure you'll love them. With that, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.